Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scot McKay.
How's it going, gentlemen? Welcome to yet another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. As always, I am your host, Scot McKay, and that's at Scot McKay on just about every major platform out there that calls itself social media, including YouTube. And we're putting 2-minute videos out every Tuesday, guys, that give you a succinct and brand new unheard of answer to the most pressing and typical questions that you guys are asking about men and women. It won't be the same old rehashed wives' tale answer that you've heard probably for years, dating back to the seduction community. This time, I'm personally going to hand you an answer that works, that you can run with. That's all there for you at Scot McKay on YouTube. If you haven't visited the website lately, it is mountaintoppodcast.com, and we have updated it, giving you more free goodies there than ever before. And finally, of course, you gotta join the Facebook group, gentlemen. It's called the Mountaintop Summit. It is growing. Guys are having a good time there. It's not a bunch of guys complaining about their marriages like you see elsewhere. I don't even know how those Facebook groups got there or why they thrive, but we're doing something completely different at the Mountaintop Summit Facebook group. With me today is a new guest. I'm pretty excited about talking to this guy. His name is Ryland Hormel, and he actually lives on a boat full-time in Sausalito, California, so he's already an interesting cat right there. He's a photographer by trade, but he also has spent 2 years or more specifically thinking about the concept of freedom and interviewing and presumably taking photos of hundreds of people trying to get down to the bottom of what it all means. His newly released book is called When Do You Feel Free?, in which he actually talks to all these people about freedom and takes lots of pictures. Ryland Hormel, man, welcome to the show. It's good to have you here.
Scott, thanks so much for having me on, man. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I think I want to jump right into this idea of freedom because you love talking about it. It's a pretty well-traveled topic here on the show because I'll tell you what, Ryland, a lot of guys nowadays, first of all, probably aren't even familiar with the cost of freedom and the value even of freedom in today's society. And my humble opinion, actually, and it's an opinion that's shared by others, not just me. It's not an original thought, that is, by any stretch, is that, a lot of guys are in that comfort familiarity zone where they're ordering DoorDash. COVID kind of trained us all to like being at home and watching women on HD getting naked instead of going out and meeting real ones and ordering things on Amazon and having them delivered same day. I call it door dashing through life. And this is on top of what I've already termed several years ago, the suburban sleepwalk, whereby we in the United States have forgotten what it means to even live because we're not out there really doing anything. We're living this weird vicarious lifestyle, watching other people do it on big screen TVs and basically comforting ourselves into oblivion, pampering ourselves into mediocrity, as a famous preacher once said. So, man, I want you to riff on your definition of freedom, and I especially want you to talk about this wonderful concept you bring to the table of freedom as a feeling. Go for it, man.
Yeah, well, we were talking about the idea of freedom as a feeling, and you mentioned this idea of comfort and our society being in this, how do you call it, the DoorDash culture?
Yeah, we're DoorDashing our way through life, right?
DoorDashing our way through life. And there's something to be said about that in terms of freedom. And it's this question of what's on the other side of our fear. And this idea that fear, it brings us to these uncomfortable places. And when we can move into that domain more often than not, on the other side of that is this feeling we get. And this is where I started to explore freedom as a feeling. And let me just back up to where this project began. And it started when I was in San Francisco during COVID. And, we were all locked down, the whole country. It was in the peak of that time. And I noticed that San Francisco really was this bubble of thought and perspective. And there was this energy to it that I started to disconnect with where it felt like we were, as a city, feeling like we were right and everyone else in the country is wrong. And this kind of went away from my idea of welcoming in new perspectives, of seeking out disconfirming information as a way to learn and grow. And I wanted to get out of that. So I called my cousin, Wes, who's a cowboy in New Mexico. And I asked him if I could come document his life and profession for a few weeks. So that's exactly what I did. I went out to New Mexico. I met up with him and a bunch of other cowboys. They taught me how to ride horses, yet alone while carrying a camera. And I went out with them on a bunch of jobs. And it was a ton of fun. It was really hard work. You're waking up at 4 a.m. You're going out, moving hundreds of cattle off of the pasture into the pens, and they are just real men and women as well who are really engaging with their passion. What I noticed was, after working with them, spending hours on horseback, they would all say something about freedom. They would all mention, in their own words, we may not make a lot of money doing what we do, but we are free to live the life that we want. And this kind of started to plant the seed of freedom as a feeling. I had always thought of freedom as this destination where, once I achieve this, once I'm with this woman, I have this much money, I live in this type of house, I will then feel free. And I kept putting it off to these things that never really existed. And so this question, when do you feel free, came up, and it kind of just completely reframed freedom in my mind as this momentary experience, this pause between our past and our future. And that's exactly what I wanted to explore more deeply, was freedom as a feeling, using this question as a vehicle to talk to people, and using a camera as a tool to connect with them more deeply. And so I traveled around the country for a year, everywhere from Alaska to Georgia. I talked to people in every community I had the privilege to connect with. And I listened to hundreds of people about freedom, and just talking to them about what they think about freedom. And then I asked everybody that same question: when do you feel free? And what I wanted to talk about is, when I look at all of these answers that I collected, I can zoom out and I can see a few different domains that come up around freedom. But there's also this equation that started to formulate as I was looking at this. And I wanted to mention this equation to start, because I feel like, Scott, you and I can really riff off of this. And I'll just quickly run through the equation, and then I'll go back and kind of go through each section. So it starts with U minus constraint equals freedom. Freedom equals time and space. Time and space equals choice. Choice equals creativity. So here's what I mean by that. U minus constraint, and a constraint can be any form of attachment as well. It's the breaking away from a constraint that creates freedom. We need something to detach from, and in that detachment, freedom begins to exist. And I think we think of freedom as this inherently good thing, which in a lot of ways it is, but it's also just a thing. It's something that just creates time and space. It gives us the ability to choose. And this is where choice becomes so important in relation to freedom, is that if we don't take ownership of ourselves, of our own lives, with the freedom that we have, then someone else will. And so I really see discipline as the key ingredient, the key element to choice here in relation to freedom. We have to be disciplined enough to choose to live the life we want to live, and disciplined enough to do it in the way that we feel is right, and being a good citizen to the world, to be a good connector of humanity. And discipline, I think, Scott, goes back to what you were saying before about comfort, about our DoorDash culture, where discipline is the intentional and deliberate choice to be uncomfortable a lot of the times. To waking up at 4 a.m., 5 a.m. when we don't want to. But we know once we do that, on the other side of that is some level of comfort. And it's momentary, but it gets us through the day at a much higher level. So when I think of this equation, we go, you break away from a constraint that creates freedom. Freedom is this area that's just time and space. Time and space leads us to choice. And choice, I think of as creativity. Anything we choose to do, we are actively creating in our lives. And so when we circle that all the way back, I see freedom as our calling to create. But that's something we have to take ownership in and choose to do that.
Well, I'll tell you what, first of all, I wish I had an Uncle Wes who was a cowboy in New Mexico. Man, that would just make for some great road trips.
Oh, he's great. He's my cousin, and cannot ask for a better family member.
Yeah, man. But listen, you're talking about removing yourself. I mean, this is firsthand experience you're talking about from the situation where you were kind of in lockdown mode in San Francisco. And I mean, what happened in Northern California during COVID is well documented. And going out to this completely different scenario where you're getting up at 4:00 in the morning and actually going out and doing something. So many thoughts come to mind here. First of all, isn't it amazing how nobody feels like doing anything nowadays? They'd really rather just sit home and not do anything. But when you kind of cajole someone out of their easy chair and get them out there and doing something, invariably, Ryland, they're glad you dragged them along and got them to do it. They're like, man, this was really fun. I sort of didn't see this coming. And it's like, yeah, buddy, that's called living. That's called feeling alive. And that brings me to
more times than not.
Yeah, right. And that brings me to the second point that I want to elaborate on, which I think is just massive and sort of sad, sort of kind of tragic comic that we even have to bring it up nowadays because people are so disassociated from the truth of the matter, which is when you're sitting at home doing this suburban sleepwalk and being bored, you feel safe. You feel like, hey, you know what? At least, people aren't shooting at me. At least I'm not being chased by a bunch of wild wolves and out there doing something dangerous. At least, I know I'll wake up in the morning if I stick around here. But then you realize you're unfulfilled. You're completely bored. You wake up the next morning doing exactly what you did yesterday. And 20 years later, you wake up and you're 60 years old. Not that there's anything wrong with that. There's still plenty left. But I mean, my point is why squander 20 years doing something that wasn't really what you wanted to do, that really involves someone else's plan for your life, which was keeping you home, keeping you quiet, keeping you out of the way, when in reality, all it really takes sometimes, Ryland, is one experience, one freaking vacation that you finally took instead of feeling like, oh man, I can't leave my work because the boss, if he knows he can exist a week without me, he's going to fire me, or I'm not going to be able to build my business to where it's going to be. Whatever you're thinking is standing in the way of you going out and living a little. I tell you what, it's a mirage, because the first time you go out and have a real honest to goodness adventure, you're going to realize, my goodness, this is what it means to feel alive. And you were so dead on accurate, Ryland, about it being all about having a little bit of uncertainty, a little bit of, God forbid, work and effort thrown into the mix and taking you out of what you're used to and simply trying something new and gasp, potentially dangerous. We've had Derek Loudermilk on this show, who pretty much is the adventure podcaster. And he defines adventure as being outside of your comfort familiarity zone. I know the times in my life where I've been in danger are the times where I felt that adrenaline rush and felt like, man, I really feel alive right now. The places I've been where there were more hazards, at least ostensibly more than in suburban America, I felt just kind of an adrenaline rush simply breathing the oxygen. Your senses are heightened. You feel better about being alive. Everything is suddenly more meaningful. And it is absolutely more tragic than comic, actually, that so many people, especially men here in this Western culture, not only have lost it, they don't even know how to imagine it, let alone go for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think you touched on something here about passion, right? And a big part of losing that is becoming disconnected from our purpose, from the meaning we live our life with. And I think a great way to experience more freedom in life is to really focus on what is it that we want to be doing. And then once we can kind of uncover that purpose, that passion, we then know what to use freedom for. Right? Because if freedom is this area where we have more time and space to choose, well, we need to direct that to make good choices. But it's really hard if we're disconnected from ourselves, from what we're doing, because we talked about this before. If we are disconnected from that, then other people will be choosing that for us, right?
Well, hold on here. You're juxtaposing a couple very profound thoughts that I think you're going to have to kind of decode for us.
Yes, please. Yeah, let me know.
Give a little bit more clarity to. On one hand, you're saying we're detached from ourselves and by extension, our purpose, what we're going to feel best about doing, what's going to make us feel like we're leaving the world a better place and making an impact and living a life well lived, et cetera, all those buzz phrases. So on the one hand, you're saying that we as human beings in Western culture, specifically us as men, right, are kind of detached from ourselves and our purpose, but we're also attached to something else or a series of something else's, right, that are keeping us tethered to this kind of ersatz reality that we live that really is just living vicariously through everything else. What's going on there? How did we get detached from ourselves and instead attached to, I don't know, living so comfortably and being so content with mediocrity?
Yeah, that's such a good question. The first thing that comes to mind is social media. We now live in a world that does disconnect us from the physical reality that we really know of. And we're in this digital space that creates a whole new environment for us to connect with. And I think that takes us away from working with our hands, from going out and just being in nature, being in the environment, connecting with people in real life. So this detachment from ourselves, I think, is a byproduct of our society. But it's, to my point before, I don't see freedom as a good or a bad thing. It's just this space where we have a greater ability to choose. And so if we look at detachment as the way to create freedom, then that's the moment where we can either reattach ourselves back into something that connects us to our purpose, to our meaning, or we can continue to detach and go into that comfort zone where we're really not going to get much out of our lives. And so I really like to think of freedom as this area where we can reconnect with ourselves through connecting with our meaning in life.
So going along with this idea of getting out of our comfort zone and going out there and living a little is obviously this idea that social media has come along, which I agree with 100,000%, in terms of what you just mentioned. People are living vicariously through themselves is how I've described it. We're out there apparently socializing with our quote unquote friends on Twitter and Facebook, but we really don't know these people. We really only have access to their highlight reel. And we feel like we've kind of paid our dues, kept in touch with people we're supposed to keep in touch with, and we could just wake up tomorrow and do the same thing, right? One of the things you talk about specifically around this idea of freedom is understanding our emotions. And indeed, if we've kind of become numb, dare I say even comfortably numb, to quote Pink Floyd, man, how prescient were they, right?
Right.
In this day and age with social media, we kind of just feel like this is the new normal. I'm pretty much devoid of emotional response, any stimulus requiring any response, et cetera, et cetera. And that in turn goes hand in hand with this insidious concept that men aren't supposed to be emotional at all. All right. Now I happen to live in San Antonio, and a couple months ago when the San Antonio Spurs won the NBA draft and the rights to a generational talent, the likes we haven't seen since LeBron James, you should have seen some of the videos that were posted on the aforementioned social media.
I loved it. I loved it.
Yeah, about full-grown men just basically doing cartwheels and screaming like little girls. Oh, yeah. Men can be emotional when they allow themselves to. But my question back to you is, as cool as it was for my beloved Spurs to win the draft, it's still living through someone else. I mean, none of us know Victor Wembanyama from Adam, except if he showed up 7'5", we'd probably be able to make a quick differentiation, right? But I don't know the kid. I don't know what he's going to do for this city. It's all still a game. Shouldn't I be at least excited about the next cool thing I'm going to be out there doing? But the problem is we're not planning any cool things to go out and do other than what we did yesterday. So weirdly, when winning the NBA lottery comes up, it actually is a pattern interrupt to our boring lives, but yet it was still on television. It was still something we're watching happen. It is so strange how far removed we've gotten from even understanding our emotions and how cool it is to feel them. Wouldn't it be great, Ryland, if we could go out on a real adventure and have something worth doing cartwheels and hooting and hollering about that was actually happening for us in our lives, in the first person, in real time? I mean, what a concept, right?
What a concept. And there's a lot there to dig into. First of all, congrats to your Spurs on winning the Wemby sweepstake.
By the way, they're about to rename the AT&T arena Wemby Stadium.
I mean, hey, you might as well.
Yeah.
You might as well. I mean, I'm a Warriors fan, so.
Oh yeah, you've had your good times.
We've had our run, but I don't think there's a better organization that Wemby could have landed in. So, yeah, I mean, the past two number one picks for the Spurs, right? Tim Duncan and David Robinson. So you guys certainly have a pattern here. But so let's go back into what we were talking about around our emotions. And I love what you were saying here about this idea that men can't feel our emotions. And it's just something that we really need to break down as a society. If we as men can't express our emotions, I argue that we are not in our masculine. We are not actually being real men.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
But you were one of the few guys who've ever come on this show and acknowledged that. And I appreciate it immensely because, you see, there's a lot of talk about feminine energy and masculine energy, and all energy is either masculine or feminine. I'm probably one of the few in the proud who figure, well, masculine and feminine is designed around attracting each other sexually, which means there are probably human traits that are neither masculine nor feminine. And
yep.
Go figure, having emotions instead of being Mr. Spock from Star Trek is one of those that men and women can share, right?
Totally. And yeah. I mean, let's stay on this topic then, if it hasn't been discussed that much, because
go for it.
I mean, for men, and let's just tie it into freedom really quick, where,
well, you can take your time if you want. I love it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if we cannot express our emotions, then we're trapped. We're caging those things inside of us. It's energy that isn't able to release. And so it's not free, right? And we're not able to be free if we feel like we are not allowed to cry, if we're not allowed to be anxious, if we are not allowed to experience fear and to discuss that with our peers.
Hold on, Ryland. We're not even allowed to have any fun.
Or to have any fun, right? And
yeah.
But we need to. We need to be having fun. We need to be experiencing life. And I love what you said before. When we are doing that, all of our senses are heightened. Our ability to be aware is heightened. And when we're aware is when we can start to let go of unhealthy attachments. But this idea around masculine, feminine energy, I mean, the fact of the matter is that both exist in us at all times. It's a reason as a man that is in their masculine more than their feminine has an ability to connect with the feminine, because there's a deep resonance within us already that knows what that is. And I mean, it's just such a good topic, because this idea that like real men cry, and I love that, because I even think about this book I just worked on. I spent a year by myself on the road, and yeah, I met a lot of people. I met up with friends along the way, but as many highs as I had a lot of lows, and a few of them were pretty rock bottom, where I felt depressed. I felt anxious. I had moments where I wanted to give up. The thing that helped me persevere and keep pushing forward was my ability to interact with my emotions and not try to suppress them. And what I mean by that is that it goes back to what we were saying before about comfort. It doesn't feel good to confront our emotions. It's a lot easier to go on social media and just start scrolling through and just ignore it. But unfortunately, it will come back up another day. This idea of facing our emotions, it is uncomfortable, but on the other side of our discomfort is this immense feeling of freedom, this joy, this connection to both ourselves and the world around us. And I like to think of our emotions as something that we don't need to identify our ego with. So the thing I started to tell myself when I was working on this book, I was on the road, I was alone in New Orleans, for example. I just recovered from COVID and my mental health was shot. And I felt so much anxiety. And I kept saying, I am anxious. I am anxious. And then I learned to reframe that saying to just saying, I'm experiencing anxiety. I'm not the anxiety. It's just coming through me. It's a momentary experience. And maybe there's a lesson in here it's trying to teach me. But I'm curious for you, Scott, too, as a man, we're not really taught to deal with and face our emotions and to express them. We're really taught to hide them, right? And the older I get, I'm learning to really use my peers, specifically other men, to talk to them about my emotions and to go deep into how are you feeling, right? And I love that question. I have a couple men in my life that will just ask me sometimes, like, how are you? And I'll go, I'm good. And they'll look at me and this, no, like, how are you? And it's that second question, the second way they say it, that like pierces something in me, that opens me up and it allows me to be vulnerable. And I always try to remember that the more I'm able to do that, the more secure of a man I'm able to become, not just for myself, but everybody around me.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, man. I'm immediately reminded of perhaps one of the most profound ideas that has been expressed on this show in some time. Happened about 4 or 5 episodes ago when Antonio Neves was on. And he talked about the importance of checking in on your bros. We as guys, we have very transactional relationships. We all ride motorcycles, play golf together. But who do we have who's calling us up and saying, hey, man, how are you really doing? How's it going? I don't want the front. I don't want the excuses. I don't want the I'm fine, how are you, shallow chit chat. Man, what are you struggling with? How's it really going for you? Because if you have any needs, man, I'm right there with you. I'll stand in the gap with you, and I hope you do that for me. And I thought that was so profound because it used to be there in this culture. It still is in this culture when guys are going to war together, when they're trying to win a World Series together. And yet we don't have alliances with other men to the point where it's not any longer a luxury to be vulnerable with each other. It's a necessity. It's about life and death. It's about feeling alive. It's about the adventure. It's about letting go of our attachment to the comfort zone again and allowing ourselves to actually let real friendship and real alliance with other dudes happen. I mean, you can imagine the ramifications when a guy is socializing himself or being socialized to that effect when it comes to relating to women. You're not going to know what connection even is. And you know what, Ryland? I've talked to men who don't understand the concept of connection with women. Now, if you're one of those guys out there and you're shaking your head at that, well, I'm almost inclined to say good for you, because there are fewer of you guys out there who understand that connecting with women is important, not just having sex with them. I'll tell you what came to mind as you were preaching all that truth, man, was the easy button. Man, people just want to press a button and get what they want right now. Immediate gratification, minimal effort. I fear for the future of this country because that's how a lot of our kids are being raised. We have the video game generation, and that's not living, right? I mean, outlaw Josie Wales, right? Dying ain't no way to make a living, boy. It's like, well, I could almost make a sideways interpretation of that, which is, if you're not living, you're probably already dying, boy. You know what I mean? And I could appreciate the fact that the Clint Eastwood movie took place in, the 1800s, but man, we need a little bit more of that willingness to get off our butts, make a little bit of effort. I mean, a modicum of effort to go out there and live a little. I mean, the easy button mentality has become so pervasive in this culture that people won't even get up and go outside and see the sunrise. I mean, in my own household, one morning we were already up very early to go to a BMX race or something we were doing. And I said, man, you guys have to stop. I said to my family, man, y'all have to stop getting dressed and brushing your teeth and come out here and just listen to these birds. And, my family was like, no, we Gucci. We got to get out of here. I don't have time for that. And I'm like, this is my own gene pool telling me this stuff. I mean, that's how pervasive it is. We don't even want to get up, go outside, and breathe fresh air anymore. It's crazy talk. Meanwhile, you go to some of these developing countries and, they don't have the scores that is social media, the mixed blessing that is social media, right? And they're out there playing soccer barefoot. They're out there hunting lions together. And we think, oh man, well, those poor souls, I wish they could be economically developed like us. And we look down our noses at those cultures, and those people are living their best life a lot more than many of us are here at home.
Yeah, and I think we try to make assumptions about things that we don't know. And that was,
oh, you bet.
Right. And the biggest theme of my book for myself, and it really was a selfish project, was I wanted to confront my own freedom in America. Being a white man, being straight, being from a privileged family, and having a lot of access to societal freedom that my other friends don't have. And I have a really diverse group of friends. And so I wanted to put myself in a position to be uncomfortable every single day. And one of the best vehicles for that was to talk to random strangers, people from all different walks of life. And I wanted deliberately to be around people that I had differing belief systems.
I want to drop a bomb on this conversation. It just occurred to me that maybe, just maybe, the rise of the phenomenon of us self-sequestering, I think it was happening already even before COVID. I couldn't get my kids to go outside and ride their bicycles or hang out with other friends in the neighborhood. I mean, we don't even know who the friends in the neighborhood are, except for a handful. Back when I was a kid, man, we rode our bikes from dawn to dusk, and we knew everybody who went to our school between here and probably 2 square miles from here and where they lived. And we could pick them up and end up with a whole posse. Even before COVID, that was going on. And now, post-COVID, having been sequestered, is it really coincidental that we're seeing an uptick in fears and renewed, somehow angrier focus on concepts like racism and feminism? Because you hit the nail on the head. When you don't understand something, when you don't have any experience with something, you fear it and you don't like it because you don't have any knowledge of it. And we've talked about on this show the idea of actually going out in the real world and talking to real people and finding out we're really human. But I've never really connected the dots between that trend towards us all being alone on purpose and liking it that way, and us therefore failing to understand other human beings, especially the differences between them and us, and resenting it and fearing it more instead of less. We were supposed to evolve as a society and move past racism, sexism, and all these other forms of ignorant hate. And by being alone and turning down the volume on how much actual interaction in the real world we're doing with real people, we have perhaps unwittingly turned up the volume on all the race hate and sexist hate again. Is there anything to that, you think?
Yeah, I think there's a disconnection there to pay attention to. But I think what you're kind of getting at here is this idea that over this period of COVID, we spent so much time alone that we forgot how to step outside of our own doors and just connect with the world.
Well, it was easy until it became difficult socially.
Yeah. And now, I mean, I see all of these things, racism, homophobia, sexism, they're so heightened right now. And we forget that I think a lot of times it can just be solved at an individual level, just with a conversation with someone that may be a part of a community that you are not directly connected to on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, man, I couldn't agree more with what you just said. Man, if we could only shout that from the rooftops and get people out of their easy chairs and just do that, clean their room like Jordan Peterson would say, that would be the first step.
Yeah. And I think there's something here around finding ways to, how do I want to put this? I noticed when I was talking to people in my book, there was times, especially in the beginning, where my perspective was being really challenged by someone else's perspective. In the beginning, I was really attached to that. I felt I needed to defend how I thought of something or how I believed in something. Then I realized I'm limiting my ability to grow. I got myself to a place, and I wish this is something that we could do more of as a society, is to celebrate the moments of which our perspectives are changed.
Yes, because it's not that we're being insulted or threatened. It's instead an opportunity to increase your knowledge and increase your personal power because your horizons have been broadened. And I mean, that sounds really cute and Pollyanna-ish, but I mean, as we've said here on this show before, that is actually an integral part of, say, Navy SEAL training. When you don't know something, you sit down, shut up, and let someone else teach it to you, and then you're more powerful, not disempowered. And so many guys, man, we're so caught up in our own egos where we just want to try to pretend we know everything and don't need anybody's help. And that's just so weak. And we're seeing a lot more of that trend in that direction. You mentioned guys being unemotional. I mean, it is such an easy button, if you think about it, for the masculinity movement to hype being such a stoic, unemotional guy. That's the easy route. That's the easy button. And the irony there, Ryland, is they'll still parrot the shop-worn phrase, do hard things. Yeah, well, here's your first hard thing to do. Go out there and actually talk to someone and be a human being with them. I love it. I think it's great. Unfortunately, time's run out on us. We could talk about this stuff for like hours and hours, and I do hope you'll come back.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, man. But right now I want to point these guys to your new book, which is called, appropriately enough, When Do You Feel Free? And it has pictures in it, photos of real people interacting, and stories, and it is a great book. It's there for you at the top of my Amazon influencer queue at mountaintoppodcast.com/Amazon. If you're listening to this show within about a week or two of its release, it should be right there at the top for you. Also, when you go to mountaintoppodcast.com / let's do Hormel, Hormel, just like the chili, you will be teleported telemagically to RylandHormel.com, which is Ryland's website, which I presume has a whole lot of pictures and a whole lot of other areas of interest for these guys, right, Ryland?
Yeah, I have a bunch of my photos. I also host wellness retreats a few times a year. So there's info to that, which is a great way to just connect with community of like-minded people. And then my Instagram is at Ry Hormel, RYHORMEL. And Scott, thanks so much for having me on, man. Really enjoyed the conversation. And I mean, thank you for pushing this conversation around masculinity forward and to just create a dialogue around it. I mean, there's no easy answer or solution to any of this. It's an ongoing dialogue, and it's important
whether we like it or not.
Yeah, whether we like it or not. And it's refreshing to hear someone like you encourage men to find ways to be in touch with their emotions. Hey, can't we celebrate the last time we shared a tear with a man, with a brother? You know, I had that the other night with one of my friends who, you know, that's not us not being men. I mean, this is one dude that you would not want to mess with, but we were able to kind of share some things together and release some of our emotions and wake up the next day feeling more in our own shoes. And I mean, to me, that's being a man.
Yeah, man. You're less self-conscious about being who you really are up front. I love it. That is absolutely masculine. And for the benefit of these guys listening, you and I kind of made a pact with each other at the beginning of this show that we simply wouldn't repeat all the retreads on freedom and masculinity that we've already covered in this show. And what do you know, man? I think we did a pretty good job. I think there's a lot of original thought here. Great stuff.
Yeah. I mean, we could talk for hours on this, but yeah, Scott, really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, man.
You bet, man. And I indeed want to invite you back and talk more. And gentlemen, if you have not been to mountaintoppodcast.com lately, check out the masterclasses. Get on the phone, talk to me for 25 minutes for free. Gentlemen, we've got to get the right quality of women into your life once and for all. If you love these podcasts, if you resonate with the message, you already know I'm your guy. Let's get on the phone. Let's talk about putting a plan of action together that gets you from here to there. Also, please visit our sponsors, including Jocko Willink's company, Origin in Maine. Best jeans, best boots, best supplements ever. If you're a hunter, you need to see what Origin has that's brand new for you. Also, thekeyport.com, not your grandfather's Swiss Army knife, gets you the coolest everyday carry device you can possibly imagine and personalize it with your own faceplate that reflects your personality and your style. Finally, be sure to check out the guys at herosoap.com. I'm working with them directly to come up with a whole new project for you that's going to be amazingly exciting when we get it rolled out for you. But in the interim, check out what I absolutely love to take a shower with, other than my wife, which is called the Cool variety of their soap. It's just called Cool. man, you will get out of the shower with the same feeling all over your physique that you have after you've shaved with menthol shaving cream. It's just really amazing. It really does a great job of waking you up in the morning or getting you all freshened up after a workout. So I highly recommend the Cool soap from Hero Soap. All of that and more is there for you at mountaintoppodcast.com. And when you partake of anything that is cool from any of our sponsors, please be sure to use the code MOUNTAIN10 to get an additional 10% off and to let those guys know that I sent you. All of that is there for you and more when you visit mountaintoppodcast.com. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.